today, what we're going to do, first of all, if you would, I sent you an email today. It was around 9:15. It's called Student Bib Example. If you could please go ahead and pull that up. There are two files in there. They're both the same document. It's just different file types. I wanted you to have options because some devices prefer different types of files. So there you go. While you're doing that, I wanted to talk at you for a minute about where we are in the class. Now, I understand, and if you don't understand this yet, I think most of you are beginning to. But I understand at this point in the semester, we are coming up on midterms. And that is rough for most people. Now, if you only have like 2 classes or whatever, it's not as hard on you. You're like, what's everybody worried about? But if you have like a full load, or if you have a job, or you got anything else going on, midterms can be difficult. I was a college student for 10 plus years, so I know what it feels like, okay? What I'm telling you is, number one, you will get through it. You may not feel like that at certain points, but you will get through it. My advice to you, as at this point a professional college student, is to take it one assignment at a time, all right? So for instance, in our class, I'm gonna remind you of this at the end of class, we have 2 assignments coming up this weekend and 1 optional assignment that I think you should all do. That can feel like kind of a lot. Not least of which if you have those other classes, those jobs, whatever. But again, 1 assignment at a time. I know that's cliche advice, but it is the best advice. If you try to take everything on at once, you will get overwhelmed, you will freeze up, you will do nothing, and then you'll just be even more stressed. 1 assignment at a time, okay? Now in terms of those assignments for this class, I wanted to specifically talk to you about the revision. That is the optional assignment I mentioned a moment ago. You have bibs due this weekend, you have a rough draft due this weekend. I know that can kind of feel like a lot for different reasons. But I also highly recommend everyone take advantage of the revision opportunity. We talked about this before in this class. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that. But what I wanted to point out to you guys, the bibs I looked at this weekend, even the worst ones, and there were some that weren't awesome, but even those where I commented and I was like, man, you really got to fix this, or you need to rethink this, whatever it was, even those, 98% of them I would say at the very least, all of them, I thought every one of you guys who did those bibs, who interacted with these other texts, have some ideas now. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you could, take yourself back a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the Fairchild poems, and it was pretty quiet a lot of the time, and a lot of the time everybody was kind of like, I don't know, man, I don't know what we're talking about, right? Now, I firmly believe, after talking about Vonnegut for a few weeks, after looking at these other sources, all of you have entered into the conversation. You all have language and ideas. You have thoughts where you did not before. So my point is, obviously, what you discovered for those bibs, the thoughts that are kind of running through your head when you think about this class, applies to paper 2. That's obvious. But a lot of them, very probably, also in some way, shape, or form apply to paper 1, to that revision. I'm not saying anyone should bring research into the first paper. Please do not do that. That is not that assignment. But you still have your thoughts. You still have your ideas now. I think all of you are more capable when it comes to the first paper now. Just haven't seen what you turned in this weekend, okay? And I believe that for everyone whose work I saw. So even if you got commentary you didn't like, one person, no joke, like an hour after I left her feedback, she dropped the class. So that was not my intention. I did not advise her to drop the class. I just gave her like some feedback. I do think, even her, unfortunately, I do think we can all approach the revision and do better with where we're at now. So I highly recommend everyone do it. All right. All that out of the way, I would assume you've had enough time to bring up the bib example. What are you looking at? It's 2 bibs, Jarvis and Vonnegut. The good news is, hopefully, by this point, we're all pretty familiar with those texts. Talked about Vonnegut for a couple weeks. We've had Jarvis under our belt for a little while now. What I want you to do, there was an extra step that I'm going to cut out, so I'm not even going to bring that up. I say that for Grace, so she's like, you forgot this. But what we're going to do, you have 2 bibs. It's going to take us a couple minutes to read through them. We are going to read through them. Here's what your job is. You're going to need to take some kind of notes. These notes are for you. They're not for me. If you see my particular note-taking is pretty spare, all I want you to do, I'll kind of show that to the camera. Hey guys, see? All I want you to do, note whenever you see an idea or even the beginnings of an argument. They may not talk about it a lot, but this is like, that's a claim, or that could start an argument. Anywhere you see that, I want you to write it down somewhere. Take a note on your laptop, jot it down on paper, I don't care. Write it down for you, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. Any ideas or arguments you see in either one of these bibs. Okay? Sound good?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so take a couple minutes, do that. We're going to talk about it. Either one, Jarvis, Vonnegut, ideas or arguments that they bring up here in the bib. Anything at all? Yeah, what's up?
War is an unavoidable thing.
Yeah. Vonnegut, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, they compare it to glaciers at one point in terms of like trying to fight it. You know, you can't really fight a glacier.
The glamorization of war through movies and media.
Good. All right, so yeah, Jarvis talks about how war is glamorized. And sort of as a result of that discussion, she also implies that in Vonnegut, you know, he's trying to not do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. What else?
In Vonnegut, it's talking about like meeting standards and upholding ideals and stuff.
How so? Like, yes, we get a little more specific.
The standards of masculinity and war and
Okay, all right. Which part are you talking about? I think I know. I just want to make sure.
the first paragraph.
Oh, that's not what I thought. Okay.
Is it-
Yeah. Well, we get more specific about that though
Oh,
in the bib. We do talk about these masculine standards specifically, but we talk about like a certain part of the book in relation to that.
chapter 1 about how Mary is telling him they're going to be played in movies about John Travolta and
John Wayne.
John Wayne and Travolta. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm young.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a weird slip. All right. Yeah. So Mary is sort of part of this conversation to a degree. But specifically, you're talking about standards. You're not just talking about war. You're talking about masculine standards. What about that that next paragraph? What are we talking about there?
The Billy's body image to the Tralfamadorians.
Tralfamadorians, right? When Billy's in the zoo, the aliens are all looking at him, and the narrator tells us basically they have no idea, they have no reason to know that he's not a great specimen, right? He's not like a super manly guy. Why? And I kind of gestured towards you, but this is for everybody. But
Because they don't really know what other humans are like, so they have nothing to compare Billy to.
good. So one idea that presents itself, because we are talking about those standards, right, is they kind of function comparatively. And again, you know this. We do this all the time. Whether you scoff or laud somebody for, you know, maintaining some kind of standard, you're almost always sort of comparing them to someone else. Sometimes maybe you're comparing them to the standard. But I'll put it to you this way. Billy is not The Rock. Right? Pretty easy to sort of, yeah. But they have nothing to compare to, so that implies that a lot of the time that's kind of how those standards work. At least masculine standards. We can't speak of all standards, but they probably do work that way too. Another idea presents itself here as well. It says they've never seen like another human man, however they phrase it. To me, it's not just that they work comparatively, but it's also this notion that they're learned, right? They've never learned those standards. How would they? So Billy knows what they are. He brings those with him. But that kind of tells you that these these are something you're sort of taught as you grow within a culture, right? And the Chalcomandorians don't have that, so. All right, good. That's pretty good for Vonnegut. I'm sure we have like one or two more, but that's not bad. Let's get a few more on Jarvis's side, if we could. War is glamorized. She's big into that, definitely.
She separates the good war stories. She makes a separation of the good war stories and the anti-war stories.
Well, and she talks about, yeah, we're kind of, because again, these are notes, so they come kind of quick. It's like, for one, Jarvis has this idea that we talked about the other day, sort of the good war and the bad war. And her point is, Vonnegut's point is, that this discrepancy doesn't really exist in the way that we're used to, right? We think of good war because we think of this. Vonnegut thinks of bad war because he was there, right? Among other things. What was the second? I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. The damn beeping. What was your second thing you said? Yeah, that.
See, she makes a clear separation from the good war stories and
The anti-war business. Yeah. And again, that's kind of in this mode. The not glamorizing it somehow also speaks to anti-war rhetoric, which is interesting. Good. What else? We can get a few more up there, I think. Does she ever, and she does, but does she ever talk at all about these standards, these masculine standards, or just masculinity in general in the Jarvis bib?
The second paragraph
Uh-huh.
talks about Vonnegut utilizes real war stories to show that there are no real strong, hunky movie stars in war.
Yeah. And that's interesting, right? Again, it seems like it's more in line with this discussion, and it is. But especially when the student here gives us that description of the kind of guys that are in those kind of movies, right? It sort of highlights another argument that's being made, but it's not as explicit. And it's this notion that these masculine standards, in a way, are also glamorized, right? They're also kind of held up. I mean, I referenced The Rock a couple minutes ago. That's because I know that we all have that reference. We're all like, well, I know who you're talking about. Because he's in fucking everything, right? And he's everywhere. He's a very successful guy, seems to work hard. But at the same time, part of that too is he's jacked. And he fits a certain standard, fits a certain narrative, so that's part of why it's everywhere, right? Yeah. Good. The other thing I would add, and again, this is kind of implied for all the reasons I've named, probably ad nauseum. We also get the sense here that war, I'm going to try to draw something. Yeah, that's not bad. Is sort of tied to masculinity in a way. Like these masculine standards and war as we think of them are inherently linked. One propagates the other, or sort of the way we think about one a lot of the time is the way we think about the other. And again, that's not stated super explicitly in the bib, but it is there in a couple parts. Like they start to talk about it. So I thought it was worth putting up here at least. All right. Next thing we're going to do, and I should say, real quick sidebar, this is a pretty good list of the main ideas we found in the bib, okay? There's still the whole novel, there's still the whole article, there's other stuff in those texts, right? I don't want anyone walking away today thinking this is. What I want to do now, much like we did a couple weeks ago when we watched the John Oliver video, we kind of had the two arguments side by side like I do here, right? We had, should we pay student athletes? And the NCAA saying no, all the reasons why, and then we tried to sort of draw lines in between different talking points, put them into conversation. That's going to be step one of this next phase, okay? Before we do that, I want to start step two. We're going to build a body paragraph using that information. We're going to outline a body paragraph, rather. In order to do that, we need to talk about the three parts of a body paragraph. They have not gone away. They'll look a little different, but they have not gone away. Does anyone recall the three parts to a body paragraph? I call them the three I's. If you want to use that, that's fine. But I'm much more interested in those actual parts. Does anyone remember any of those?
Introduction.
I mean, no. But that's one of the paragraphs you need, right? It's the first paragraph. But,
Evidence?
good. It's right here.
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of evidence usually? What do we normally use in this class?
Citations?
You want to cite good quotations. Quick side note: the citations are not correct in this bib. They're close, but they're not right. Yeah, you want to cite specific evidence, and a lot of the time in a class like this, I mean, we're looking at a novel, or last unit we did poems. A lot of the time that's going to mean quotations. You're going to quote specific material. And even when you don't do that, you still want to probably paraphrase something because you're looking at something specific. You're not going to ever, in a body paragraph, take on the entire book, right? You're going to take on a specific element of the book, whatever that might be. That's our evidence. Talk about that in a minute. What are the other two parts? Okay. First sentence of a body paragraph. What's it supposed to do? Very first sentence.
Introduce the topic?
Yeah. What kind of sentence is it?
Introduction?
No. It's a topic sentence.
Ah.
Yeah. You see how close you were? Topic sentence. Does anyone recall how a topic sentence is meant to operate? It's supposed to do two things. Every body paragraph, your very first sentence is your topic sentence. Should do two things.
Tell you what the rest of the body paragraph is going to be about?
It should convey the main idea. Very good. Second thing.
Be something relating to your thesis statement?
I mean, sure. You want your whole paper to do that, right? It should be an argument. In these papers, we're building arguments, so every body paragraph should make an argument. And if your topic sentence is conveying the main idea of every body paragraph, well, then your topic sentence should be an argument, right? That's going to be a little bit different in this paper. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. But we have topic sentence, we have evidence. What's the third guy? Something to do with that evidence. Something to do with...
Explain that evidence,
Good. Do you explain what about it?
how it relates to the thesis or your argument.
Yeah. So if your first sentence is your claim, boil down to a sentence, okay? And then you have your evidence, whatever that is. The rest of your paragraph, your analysis, your interpretation, your explanation, whatever you want to call it, that's where you help me understand how your evidence proves this argument, right? So every body paragraph works. That's not going away. Now again, I say it's a little bit different in this paper. And in order to show you that, we got to do this. So to begin with, can we find just like something we could put into conversation from this side with something from this side? Let's get them talking.
War equals glamour is on both sides as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty easy, right? These two. She basically speaks to the idea at various points that war in our culture is glamorized, right? She mostly talks about old movies. Vonnegut also seems to sort of be in line with that thinking, and his project, according to her, and also according to him, if you believe he's the narrator, which he sort of is, his project is to not do that. He's going to try to come at it from different angles to not glamorize. We can do that. We almost have to a degree, right? Now, what we could do, and we won't here because we don't necessarily have time, is we could think about this for a second and then see if there's any other connections we could make to further flesh out our body paragraph. As I said, we're not going to do that here. We could. We're going to end up kind of doing it later over here. Now, a topic sentence. Normally, this will be an argument because you are making arguments, right? In this paper, this is an informative synthesis. We're going to talk about synthesis today, but very quickly, informative, that part, that's a really fancy word that just tells you we're basically writing a book report, okay? This is the only time in this class I will ask you to do that. What that means is you do not make arguments necessarily in this paper. The first paper was all you. The third paper is going to be mostly you. The second paper is mostly not you. You still have work to do, and again, we're going to talk about it. But the informative part, you're just arranging other people's ideas, okay? So when I keep saying you're putting them into conversation with each other, that's what I mean, to a degree. Okay, so to translate all that into a topic sentence, if we're going to get these two talking about this idea, is there a way we can put that in a sentence? She talks about this. He also kind of does that, but he does something else. Like, is there a way to say that in a single sentence? Seems trickier than it is, I promise. All right, so a couple things. Number one, this is very, 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 very general, right? That's all it can be at this stage. Sorry. Even in papers like our first paper where you make an argument, most of the time when you're drafting, you have little to no idea what you're going to end up saying. Some of you encountered that. The problem is, you write your topic sentence not really knowing where you're heading, and you never go back and change it. So your topic sentence is basically you throwing up a white flag and then hoping you figure it out later, and you never address this. You always have to go back and address your topic sentences, is what I'm telling you, okay? Even here, this is like a really good North Star for us to kind of drive toward. But as we go, there's a good chance we'll get more specific. There's every chance we might say something very different by the end. We don't know, okay? But for right now, this is where we're headed. Okay. Next thing we got to figure out, evidence, both from Jarvis and from Vonnegut, each one. We'll do Jarvis first. War is often glamorized, often depicted in a certain way. I know you guys probably haven't seen too many old war movies, but you've almost certainly seen newer war movies, action movies, take your pick. Seems like 75% of the things we watch these days, somebody's getting shot at. So, yeah, all of you are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. So, anything like that, you kind of know what she's talking about. Is there anything we can think of in Jarvis? It can be from the bib or it can be from your memory that we could cite specifically to talk about that. Basically, we're saying war is made to look cooler than it really is. It's depicted inaccurately somehow. She has a couple moments where she sort of points to that in different ways.
Well, in the bib, she says Jarvis talks about how the Englishmen perform gallant war roles.
Sure.
And put on well past simultaneously creating new ones for future. So I guess.
Okay. So we can maybe talk about that. Well, let's put that over here. So our potential evidence for Jarvis is the Englishman. And, I mean, she says all sorts of things about him, but I mean, it's also from Vonnegut, so I mean, that kind of, we can do some of our own thinking about that too. But in the off chance that we don't want to, in the off chance we want to have something else, what's something from Vonnegut where we could talk about not glamorizing war? And again, this can be from the bib or it can be from your memory. Either something he does to not do that or something he says about it. Because they do talk about it in the book.
I guess like the first chapter with Mary, when he said he's not going to make,
Good.
there will be no specific characters or climaxes.
Good. She calls him out and basically forces him to say that he's not going to do that stuff. Specifically, she says, you'll have a part for John Wayne,
Not going to go.
not Travolta. He's not really an action guy, you know? And she says, wars will be fought by babies, like the babies upstairs, right? Good. All right. We could continue this. What I'm gonna make one executive decision just because I see where we're headed. I've done this a lot. I'm gonna save us some time. Well, you would probably, first of all, this would work fine, what we have. Like I can see that too, but I think in terms of where we're headed, especially with Mary, this might work a little better. So what would probably happen when you're drafting is you would roll with that and be fine, or you might discover this as you went and change things. So I'm skipping the step where we change things. So I remember the part where Jarvis talks about the sands of Iwo Jima. It's this movie starring John Wayne that people go to, and then when they come out of the movie, there's some people waiting on them in the lobby.
Recruiters.
Marine recruiters. She says there's lines of young men wanting to sign up. They're gonna go fight in Korea. They just watched this movie. They step out to the lobby and they're like, I can go do that. Like to the nth degree. Like totally nonfiction. Like this is like legit happening. Jesus. I couldn't even imagine seeing a movie like that, thinking that's how it's gonna be, and then you get there. Like, wow. Okay. We'll see if that works. You guys can prove me wrong, but you guys have done well. I think you can handle it. Now, in order to get these talking together, sorry, that's bothering me. I don't know what that is. We have to focus on details. Sands of Iwo Jima, guys are coming outside into the lobby. They see these Marine recruiters. They're going to sign up. It's going to be awesome. We understand that they're maybe not the most informed when they make that decision. Alongside Mary, sort of challenging the narrator, saying, you're going to write stories for John Wayne and Frank Sinatra. Wars are going to keep being fought by babies, like the babies upstairs. Is there any way, just off the cuff, you guys can see where we might get those two talking? Like, do they cover any similar ground to you?
Movie.
Okay,
Role.
go ahead. What do you mean?
Basically talking about how movies, war movies,
Mhm.
excites people and gets young minds thinking that they can play that role.
This role. Yeah. Okay. So the first point we can make, and I think it's a good one, is we see a fictional discussion of a real world issue, right? It's almost like, well, this could be made up, and then Jarvis is like, no, it happens. And again, I'm just making notes, right? Okay. I like what you said too about playing a role, right? Because again, we understand John Wayne. We use his, first of all, not his real name. That's his actor name. His real name, I forget now. It's famous though. It's a woman's name. It's like Stacy or something. Anyway, basically his real name. We use this real actor to talk about real people, and they're all playing a role in some way, of course with different outcomes. Good. Anything else you guys see? Or is there more to say about this? I want to help you, but I want to see what you guys can come up with first.
I I guess, tie them both together. I mean, war, there's a victor and a loser. Losing means you probably die.
Yeah. Well.
Because I know in Slaughterhouse, he just plays it off so it goes as the
Yeah.
that he uses all the time. She
Yeah.
mentioned it like once, and
She brings it up in the bib.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that could come in. I'm not sure how though, because again, what we're ultimately talking about, like already we're more specific than this,
Yeah.
right? We're not just talking about the way war is glamorized, we're talking about playing roles. We're talking about participating in a narrative, even though you don't realize it's a narrative, basically. Here's a question I have. Is there a way, because again, you have to focus on details. We've basically focused on this right now, and sort of what's going to happen to these guys. What about this? Mary says it a couple times. She says wars are fought by babies, like the babies upstairs. She keeps repeating that.
Well, they're going into it like thinking that they're, you know, very masculine in this John Wayne like profile character. But then once they get in there, they realize how horrible it is and how it's not fun at all.
And
they
how-
turn into babies.
Well, and to continue your thought, like, because they're not this guy, how unprepared they are,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So, you know, another point further, you know, and this is Mary's line of thinking. Her point is they think they're John Wayne, they're not. And on that spectrum between John Wayne and baby, maybe they're closer to that. Right? Sure. Sure. Especially in terms of preparedness, right? In terms of mindset. John Wayne in the movies has all the answers. He's a bad motherfucker. If you go in just assuming you're going to be that, you'd probably be disappointed in a lot of cases, right? Sure. Another way we can do this, and it can tie, I think, into this point as well, especially with these guys. No shade, all right? And I'm talking to the guys because we're talking about 1950s, women weren't allowed to fight. But you guys are 18, 19 years old, something like that. Mary's calling you babies, right? And this would extend to you, by the way, but Mary doesn't know that yet. Comparing you to like John Wayne, even the real John Wayne, but especially John Wayne in the movies. He's like in his 40s or his 50s, depending on what movie you're talking about. How are you guys like babies compared to that guy, do you think? What else could we be talking about?
Basically, lack of knowledge.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Ignorant of what really happens and what's really going on.
Okay. Well, especially if you're in a goddamn movie theater and you just sign up to be a Marine because you saw a movie? She says baby, I say idiot, but babies aren't idiots. I have a 3-year-old, he's a moron, right? For real. He's very cute, but like, anyway, aren't we also talking about lack of experience? In war, specifically, but just in general. You're 18 or 19, again, this is beyond gender. You're 18, 19 years old, something like that. You haven't seen a lot of the world. Most of the world you've probably seen has been under the wing of your parents. And here's a fun fact. They don't often try to trick you. If they do, you should talk to somebody. That's fucked up. But most of the time, your parents are there for you. They got your back. They're going to be more or less honest with you, right? These guys were not prepared for the world, for being taken advantage of, right? We're talking about innocence. So yeah, again, to continue this point, innocent, sort of not just about war, but this may be too general, right? But the world at large. What you're doing now is you're taking Mary at her word about babies, and you're using it, you're applying it, again, to that scenario. They're guileless. They're easily tricked. Like a baby. So what have we done? Again, we're getting way more specific. This will likely change, but for right now, it's good enough. We have two specific pieces of evidence that we would want to contextualize in the ways we've talked about. We'd want to put citations, all that jazz. And then after that, we have at least, I think we have considerably more because we have to explain what we're saying, but we have at least 3 sentences based upon that evidence. And importantly, most of it has arisen through synthesis. We are talking about both of these together. There may be times where you have to talk about a piece of evidence on its own, right? I mean, just to make sense or to explain, that's fine. But again, remember the name of the game is synthesis, talking about them together. What does sort of holding these two up next to each other help you figure out, talk about, whatever? Okay? This is going to be where you make your money in this paper, this stuff. Last thing I'll say. At this stage, we could probably go a little further. We could dig a little more into the details, but I think we're also kind of running out of stuff to talk about with these, which is totally fine. We've said some cool stuff. You have 2 things you could do. You can either sort of go back to the well and say, well, it sounds like I'm addressing a well. I'm not. That was a figure of speech. But you go back over here and you say, I know, it's really dumb. You go back over here and you say, is there some other related part to this conversation from one of these texts, right? I could bring in like another piece of evidence or 2, potentially, right? Continue this conversation, but in a different direction. Or, because we have not talked about the fact that this is only 2 texts, right? We also have sort of X and Y over here, our other 2 texts that we will also have notes about, ideas from, that could potentially play a role in this paragraph. You go to one of those, you know what I'm saying? That's how like 85% of this paper works. You're gonna have an introduction, you're gonna have a conclusion, but this is most of the paper. Setting up every body paragraph like this, organizing the information like I talked about, putting the text into conversation. That's what this is. Do I have any questions about this? Okay. That guy's still backing up. I hope he gets wherever he's going. All right, well, somebody did raise a good question. And I always forget that I always get this question, so I've been addressing it with every class. He asked if we have to integrate all 4 sources into every paragraph. And the short answer to that is no, okay? I'm not saying you can't use all 4 sources in a paragraph. I'm cautioning you against it though, okay? Like I've seen it done well. I've never seen it done throughout an entire paper. Like understand the more sources you add to a given paragraph, the hairier it's gonna get. It's just gonna get less wieldy, okay? 3 seems to be a good number. 2 can be fine depending on what you're talking about and what evidence you have and whatever, like how much you have to say about it, okay? 2 to 3 though seems to be a really good number. 4 is kind of difficult, but if nothing else, you do not have to talk about all 4 texts in every paragraph. That's bananas. That would be a bananas assignment. I'm not asking you to do that, okay? What else? Oh, that also led me to talk to you guys real quick about. I keep saying organization is basically what we're doing here, and it is. If you've never outlined in your life, this is the paper to outline, okay? You're still going to figure stuff out on the page. Like this isn't going to tell you everything you're going to do, but it's going to give you a really good idea because you're going to get lost at times in all this. It easily happens, okay? The other piece of advice I would give you, after you write a paragraph or 2, whatever, go back and look at those paragraphs. If they're really long, the paragraphs in this paper are going to be longer, by the way, because you're talking about multiple texts. But if you have a paragraph that's like 2 pages long, that's too long. That paragraph's too long. What you probably need to do is cut it in half, at the very least. And chances are good you can find like, well, this is what I was talking about for maybe the first half, but somewhere around the halfway point, it seems to always happen, that second half, I switched to like 2 different texts, and it's a related conversation, but it's not the same conversation. Well, then that's its own paragraph, you know what I'm saying? Like these are concerns that are going to come up as you work on this paper, this specific paper. That all makes sense?